This is Catherine Tipper and Kalin Jordan, and this is our podcast Planarchy, where we dig deep into topics relating to 401k plans in the retirement industry. So, Kalin, we were just on top of having done a lot of content for Women's Retirement Security Days. So, we're going to go through the questions that we asked other people and what we learned. So, what do you think are the important questions that you found through this whole experience?
I saw a lot of overlap between, I think, the things we knew going in terms of what affects women's pay and how that has an effect on their retirement. But then I learned so much about the specific parts of the plan that just aren't as accessible and the kind of barriers that we see. Um, so it gave me a lot of ideas and a lot of questions and made me think a lot about what we should be doing over the next year for the next Women's Retirement Security Day.
What hit me really hard was one person talking about you don't always get to choose your day. And when we talk
Mm.
about planning for retirement, we're always like, I'm going to work until I'm 63 and a half, right? Well, sometimes life doesn't work out the way you thought it would, right? Either you have to do some caregiving, or some people actually find it hard to work in their 60s. Maybe it's hard to get the job. So the idea that you should have a plan, but the idea that you can get to the number that you have in your mind
Mm.
may or may not happen. And that's why it is so important to start early. And then I'd say one other thing in terms of that unpredictability of life. One person had a story of like her parents left a war
Mhm.
torn country to come with her, and come live with her in the United States. And that's not something you can plan for, right? That wasn't in the financial plan. Um, but she needed to do it, and she found a way to get resources to help her with her parents, but to continue to save for retirement because she wants to actually not have to be dependent when she's older. So it's I think the stories really point out that you have to have a plan and start early, but just know you don't always hit the marks you think you're going to hit. So,
And when you mention stories, it also makes me think that to see how everyone that we spoke to was involved in some kind of capacity. They knew somebody that was involved in the organizing of that day, or they had some particular interest in Women's Retirement Security Day. But to see the correlation between people's stories and how they talked about their work, how they approach their work, how they think of giving advice to their clients and women specifically, I just found that really interesting because the unpredictability is exactly the thread that I pulled away from it too, that you don't know what's going to happen. And the earlier you start and the more you're able to do, the better you are set up later, because like everything is just so unpredictable. But it was really inspiring to hear people's stories and how they drew away lessons from their own experiences and then were able to share that with their clients, because it's one thing to have somebody that's a professional tell you should do A, B, and C. And you're like, okay, well, that's what you say, and you're the expert, so sure. But if somebody tells me I should do these things and then they tell me why, and then they tell me a story from their own life that has a direct correlation, I'm a lot more likely to listen. And yeah, that was really interesting. I didn't expect that going into this series, but that was something that I really walked away with.
yep, yep. So, tell me, one of the most interesting questions I found was, what what did you learn about money when you were young? What did your family
Mm.
miss in maybe teaching you about money? I know for me, what's interesting is, I mean, I kind of come from a family of teachers and preachers, right? So there always was a retirement plan that was part of the job. So the idea of having to do something outside of you just get a good job and you'll have a good retirement plan. Everything was about just get a job, just start earning some money.
Mm.
There wasn't really a thought of, now what do you do with the money? There's you should save some, but there was no number put to that or where it should go. And I would say that of my parents, the ones who've done the best were the ones who actually listened to a financial professional who was selling a product, such as long-term health care, long-term care. That really helped, but that wasn't because my family had a forward-looking thought on money. It was more, here's an opportunity, I'll listen to this person. So I would
Mm,
say having an internal long-term plan is not what I came from. And so Women's Retirement Security Day is really, I think, important because it pushes down the idea that you need to jump on this early. You need to start saving some money for your security early, and you need to actually look for a vehicle where you can get some experience in the markets over time, because that will help you get to your goal.
mm.
So my family had zero clear idea of that. So what was your insight in terms of what you learned about money as a kid and now what you have to think of it as an adult?
I'm not exactly sure how to start answering that because the first thing that came to my mind when I started to think about this earlier today before our conversation was my mom saying to me, money doesn't grow on trees. Like I remember hearing that a lot. And I remember the concept of there needs to be more money coming in than going out, or you're not going to have any money, like that kind of being instilled in us and not to be wasteful. But I would say probably a similar experience to you where it was go to school, like I was expected to go to school, get a job, um, and get a career, not a job, because that's the whole point of me going to school was. But outside of that, yeah, no one really talked about retirement. I do have some vague memories of being in high school and my mom like doing paperwork for my dad's 401k, and kind of mentioning it to me, but it was never explained what their retirement plan was or what I could start doing at a young age. Everything was more, we live paycheck to paycheck. And so that's the mentality of the household. And so that was the mentality that I walked out of. And it really stuck with me. I would say that I've had that kind of paycheck to paycheck mentality for like a long time.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get out of that mindset when you feel like there's always just so many more, unexpected things that kind of come up, and you're like, how are you going to get your head above water? um it's just felt like maybe because when I graduated the economy had crashed and there were no jobs, but it's just felt like always as an adult difficult to kind of get your feet underneath you, um when there's like a level of, yeah, uncertainty. So I never really thought about, what about 40 years from now? I was like, what about next week? What about next month? Um, so I think that coming into our space and learning more about all of this has helped me change that mindset, even though it's something I should have probably done a long time ago.
As my kids say, adulting is hard, right? So,
I agree with them. It seems
um,
so fun when we were young. I was like, this adulting thing seems great. And then you get
right,
to be an adult, and I'm like, gosh, I'd love to have no responsibilities again. That would be wonderful.
right,
Um,
right, and really not worry about anything
mhm,
other than school, right?
mhm.
Um, yeah, and one of our folks did that we talked to really did bring up the idea that she was raised with the idea that if I work hard and have a good job, everything will work out. Do you know what I mean? I think there's a
Yeah.
real kind of simplistic of it's the integrity of your work will pay off for the way that you
Yes.
retire.
And if you
And
work hard, that you'll be okay when you retire because you worked
right,
hard. Not that you
right,
had to work smart, but that you just worked hard.
right. And so, um, yeah, how to be a smart cookie about it. It's taken a lot longer to
Mhm.
like kind of learn what that really means.
Yeah.
Um,
And your parents had pensions, right?
yeah,
And so my parents didn't have a pension, but my grandfather was a mailman. And so I did see how his pension kind of played a role in a level of security in their household. And my grandmother's like still relying on that pension.
yeah,
So I had like a little bit of an understanding that there was like this union kind of thing that would like protect you and make sure that you were okay when you retired was sort of the message that I got as a young person. Is that something that you also had watching your
Well,
parents be a
well, I
part of a
mean,
pension?
definitely my parents, it was kind of two levels. So one was they were teachers, so they had pensions. But it's funny is they found it really important to complain about it, right? That it wasn't as good as it would be if they were in private industry and stuff
Mm,
like that. And in the districts they were in, they actually did pretty well. Okay. I think that they were always measuring themselves with what they call professionals. So it would be
mm,
doctors and lawyers. And so they always were thinking that what they should have for retirement was similar to those people. But what's interesting is I don't think they had a very sophisticated understanding of how much doctors and lawyers really make. That in some
mm,
ways, they are actually small business people and they're searching to get enough clients and get enough out of insurance. And it's not an easy home run just because you're a doctor. And
right.
lawyers are a lot of lawyers work till they can't. And part of it is, it's almost like a part-time job, in your 70s that you keep on picking up a case here and there.
Yeah.
And their income actually isn't as predictable if they're on their own. And with if they're with a big firm, it might be, but there's the big firm hours and demands. So I think my parents had a fairly simplistic view of how it worked. I knew I could go be a teacher and maybe get one, but I didn't want to be a teacher. I knew I could go to the post office, but I didn't want to work for the
Mm,
post office. I knew people who went to the military first and then retired and then went to the post office. I knew that was a thing, but the jobs didn't those jobs didn't appeal to me. So I didn't really understand what plan B was.
mm.
So,
While you're saying this, it made me think of something else too, if I can jump in.
sure.
Well, something I wanted to ask you because as I think back about our conversations, I noticed one trend that I saw a lot was people talking about divorce and the effect that that had on their 401k, their retirement plans specifically, but just on their finances and how women approach those situations and, typically put their, if they have a family, put their family first instead of their own financial kind of viability. People talked about wanting to stay in the house for their kids, like those kinds of decisions. And I imagine you and I would have very different perspectives on this because you've been married for a long time. I've never been married.
Right.
And growing up, my mom really instilled in me that I should, grow up, get a career, and not rely on anybody
Right.
for financial support. And that seemed like very important to her when I was young. And I'm just curious, having, you know, you got married so young and
I
all
know.
of your financial everything has been entangled. Like you and I
Right.
have talked about it. That's why I'm saying
Yes,
you've got
I know.
married
I know.
so young, right?
It's crazy.
So
Yeah.
it's such a different perspective. But when you hear somebody share that story, I don't know. I just wonder what you, yeah, I have like my own kind of feelings about how you have to protect yourself when you enter into a financial contract with somebody and like what that looks like. But that's because I've never been in that situation. So I think maximally like how to protect myself. But I wonder, what you walked away with thinking about those kinds of situations.
Well, my parents got divorced when I was 15. So I
Mm,
saw it really up close. The thing is, they were both teachers. So wasn't, their retirement was somewhat similar, though my dad was a high school teacher and my mom elementary, and there was a difference in pay rate. There wasn't enough value in the house for it to be a huge thing. And I mean, I have to say that when my parents got divorced, money was super tight. I mean, I worked on my 16th birthday because I needed money. Do you know,
mm,
it was tight in the house. So my view of it really in the beginning was like short term. Like you needed to work and you needed to work hard because you couldn't just sit and hope somebody would take care of you. So it wasn't really explained to me, but that was what I saw. And
mm,
so I would say, It is unusual I got married so early, but I would say seeing my parents get divorced and feeling like it helped them emotionally in some ways, but it was still hard all the way around. That I really wanted to make it work, because I saw the cost, not just the monetary cost, the emotional cost of going through it.
Mm.
So, you know, has it made us, did it get us ahead of our peers? Just like you, I hate to say that in the mid 80s, we graduated with liberal arts degrees and moved to Seattle. And that was not a good job market for liberal arts people.
Mm.
And I hate to say, when you talk about the family views of things, I think my family just had a view that if you had a good education, you would get a good job and you would be fine, right? It wasn't a complex, deep understanding based off of lots of different experience.
Hmm.
And so we really struggled in the beginning because our skill sets didn't match what was out there. Um, in Seattle, you needed to be an engineer and work for Boeing, or somehow it be in forestry with Weyerhaeuser. And so there was a real kind of, the only thing that I really got push on was maybe I should be a lawyer because that was a
Oh my gosh,
profession
me
where,
too.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
first I was supposed to be a doctor and then a lawyer. But I think, the solution was to go down a certain professional path and you would be safe. But
Mm.
it didn't look that clear to me. I didn't see it as it would necessarily be safe. So then I didn't know the flip side. If I went into business, what that would be. But that was my accidental ending up in a job where I was responsible for a P&L for a store and actually found out I liked making the numbers pop. So a lot of
Yeah.
what I've done is based on discovery, not from a family with deep understanding of all these things. So
Like when I hear you say that, I just think about, I started college at 17. You're expected to take out all this money to pay for this thing, to invest in your future, and nobody has a real conversation with you about what your life's going to look like if you pursue this degree. So I was
right.
studying political science and theater. No one sat down with me and told me that if I wanted to work in politics, I was going to work, 3 months, 18-hour days every day, and then not work for 2 months, and then go back on another camp. Like what the lifestyle would look like, what I'd have to give up. I've been volunteering on campaigns, but I didn't really know. And no one sits down with you and asks you the questions about, like, how much money do you think that you're going to need to make to live? How many hours do you want to work a day? Do you want to have a job where you're working weekends and nights? Do you want, like, what kind of work life balance do you want? Do you want to be your own boss, or do you want to just, do you not want to be your own boss? Like all these different kinds of questions about how you're going to live your life once you get this degree and what it means for your actual viability in the job market. Nobody really talks to
So,
kids and young people about that stuff.
well, I'd say two things about it. I have actually met people who had somebody in their life that was either a parent or an aunt or uncle who did explain that to them. So there are some families that
Yeah.
talk to each other about that. I wasn't part of that. Um,
Same.
I
I
so,
have
but
done that for like a younger like cousin of mine had the same conversation of like, hey, you say you want to go to law school, like this is what the hours will be like.
right,
This is how much time you're gonna have to spend. This is how hard it is. Is this what you want to do? And then make a decision with more information.
or then maybe be a corporate lawyer because then you have
Because
the
then it's
corporate,
worth it.
but I
Right.
would say when I really reflect now, though, back to the college thing, I feel like I was the last generation where you could actually work and
Mm-hmm.
get most of your college paid either through your work that you did in high school and college. You didn't have to take horrific loans out. You took out moderate loans. And part of it was that school wasn't over the top expensive yet. Do you
Yeah.
know? And there were more programs to help kind of close the gap. So I was lucky that I didn't have any student loans.
But if you look at the difference in like generational wealth, that happening and that ending with your generation and
Right.
things kind of shifting, It's a huge reason why there's such a difference in who owns homes, who owns properties. You know, my parents are both able to go to high school, not go to college, and buy a house right after school and start working. Nothing super like specialized. They were just able to like get regular jobs with a high school degree, get
Right.
a house, have a car, have two cars, go on a vacation once a year. Like generations after yours, you kind of don't live like that. And if you don't get that base level of owning property and having that, wealth accrue,
Right.
and that property just always goes up, right? Like it really sets you back
It's
so much.
supposed to. It's supposed to. I'd say
It's
that's
supposed
another
to.
hard thing about your generation, but, some of it, at least you're locked into a good monthly payment if you own it. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
But I
Instead of if you pay rent, that money's going out the door. It's not
yeah,
getting, it's getting you a place to live, but it's not getting you the same kind of value.
but in my analysis, what really happened, it was that people started the they were polishing up college degrees in ways that they couldn't live up to, right?
Mhm.
There's only so many college degrees that really land you in a well paying job straight out of school. There just is. And liberal arts people, that's not true. And they tried to tell us that where we were,
Yeah.
like just being a liberal arts people, employers will love us and hire us. And that wasn't true, but weren't carrying the debt. Do you know? So, but now, and when you look at it, the dorms were more bare boned. Everything was more bare boned.
Mhm.
And now, and I say this having my two kids go through college and just looking at what the costs were for different things, just blowing my mind that you would pay more in college than you could get for
Y-
1 year's worth of work getting out of it, right? So it's an equation, and this is when you and I like run for politics, Catherine. Is just that
It's
I
like through my head.
yeah, it's just we've kind of created a dynamic that's more about marketing and
Mhm.
sales than it is about value and what's appropriate for young teenagers to do, because
Right.
really when you're 18 you have no idea what you want to do, and
No.
you don't have a permanent. So I'll bring this all back to retirement, in the sense is you're a kid already trying to make decisions and you don't really know how to do them, and you're doing your best, thrown into a job market then where you didn't really quite understand that, and you don't quite understand this either, right?
Mhm.
So it's like it takes you a while to finally sort it out and go, I understand what I'm supposed to be doing. Unless you have a family that's good on maybe all of these conversations, right? Hey, we're standing here at Women's Retirement Security Day going, my family wasn't good at any of those conversations. So it puts me behind, unless, in my case, I worked at Starbucks and they had a 401k plan. Do you know what I mean? Did
Yeah.
I know what that was? Did I know what I should do? I just knew I'd get a match if I put some money in.
Right.
And it really was just a program that an employer had that I was like, okay, I'll do what my employer says. So, what other questions did you find especially provocative, or really made you think?
I would say what made when I talked to Christina, in the time that she and I talked before we interviewed her on the podcast, and then when we had her on the podcast, just because it was like talking to another policy wonk person, because she is a policy like wonk person. So having somebody who has thought about the intersectionality of all these different things, how every little piece from the wage gap to auto enrollment and auto escalation, how they kind of all fit in together to creating it so that women save less money than men in their retirement. So I found that to be particularly thought provoking. And also that it seems like everybody we talk to kind of like knows some of the things we need to do differently in order to make these plans more participatory, to have more people involved in them.
Yeah, yeah. I think what you're kind of saying is we're really actually, in some ways, not talking about a secret sauce, something that hasn't been thought of. It's more, do we put it in place?
Right.
Do we
The will
educate
to
and
do
talk
it.
about it? Do we make it a plan, or do we just kind of chew on it? And yeah, there's a little bit of a hands off. And part of that is, well, part of the solution is if employers do it, then you're more likely to get people to do it. Though the funny thing is, sometimes people say if it's tied to the employer, then people are more passive and not thinking it through themselves. So it's really hard to know how you move the general population. But
Mm,
I think that in some ways the decision has been made by the states that there's more state sponsored plans, right? So the decision, we now have a default in a lot of states, a default that you're going to be in it. You have to opt out actively.
mm,
And that at least gets people thinking about it and possibly in it. But then our message is always, if you have to take a step up, go to something that has more different kinds of um, investment choices, has the protection of ERISA, all of those things. And that's what you find like in a 401k plan.
mm.
So once again, though, I think that people really don't always understand the differences of what each product gives them, right? So
Yes.
there's just a huge learning curve. Um, and not saying that to make people feel like they can't do it. It's just it.
No, because honestly, I feel like if I can understand it, then like anybody can kind of get their mind around it. And the number of times that somebody asks me what I do, and I tell them I sell retirement plans, and they always, it doesn't matter what profession they are, they always have a question.
Yeah,
Everybody always has a question. And I forget who we were talking to who said that some either they assumed or maybe some in their family assumed that lawyers and doctors and people who have specialized education must also be really knowledgeable on these issues as well. It's just not true. We find this all the time in conversations that we have with clients or potential clients, that there's just so much that people don't know. And I think what's more challenging now is there's more access to information than ever, but there's more bad information out there than
right.
ever before. There is just so much content on social media with people just talking at the camera about money with no basis in fact for what they're saying. You guys have a whole series about it, right? Where you
Right,
like review
right, right,
people in those clips, and there's no fettering of like access to information. And there's like, what's the place that people go where they trust the information that they're getting? And I think that that lack of trust shows up in people not wanting to participate in a plan,
right,
because they're
right.
being fed information that like actually 401k is a waste. You shouldn't put your money in there. And people are just telling them because they want them in their product that they're getting, money back
Right.
from. So
Usually they're screaming and creating fear too. So, that those messages are louder and harder. So it does create some fear when I would say Women's Retirement Security Day was kind of like, let's bring it down. Let's have good conversations from a variety of different directions to help people understand the foundational nature of this. And that even though we're talking about women's security, this is great financial fundamental knowledge for everyone.
right.
And in this era, you do have to know what you're doing for yourself as well. I
And
think
here's
when you talk about generational, I think before there was more of a sense that society was going to have some kind of plan that would help you be okay. And I would say in the recent period, it's much more up for grabs, right? It's much more you got to do it for yourself or work for somebody who does it for you. And so I think there's a shift too in just feeling that it's going to be okay. There will be something for you. So,
And I also think the other thing that a lot of people don't realize is something that helps women helps everybody.
well,
And I know this firsthand from working on policy issues that when we were writing pay equity legislation, we put in a piece that said, every employer has to, when they post a job, post the salary so that everybody knows what the salary range is, because not knowing the salary range can favor people who have historically made more money, because they'll have a higher salary range and they'll ask for more money, and it's going to hurt. That doesn't just help women, that helps anybody who's first time out of school getting a job. That helps people of color. That helps everybody. So this idea that we can't like find solutions that help women and it's going to somehow what give them a leg up over men, it's just not true. Like these kinds of changes to how we approach things, like auto escalation, auto enrollment, right? It helps everybody. But if there's a particular group that's lagging behind, then you kind of have to think of ways to get them like more engaged. And usually these things help engage a lot more people.
Right. Earlier and better. So,
Yeah.
okay. Well, I know that we a good podcast, you always learn from your guests. So we learned a lot and very excited about that. And I know that we are looking at what kind of programming we can do to keep talking about this. And, you know, the fundamentals, the basics about retirement plans, so it doesn't seem so scary or such a huge mountain to climb. And also to really point out that as much as everybody worries about products, it's also about the community and the experts that know how it works and how you can rely on them to help make really good decisions.
Mm.
Um, so I'm pretty excited.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's
So,
been almost a year of us doing the podcast, you know.
yep, yep.
So we got that to
So
think about too.
So, if anybody needs additional information, you can contact us at sales@hunterbenefits.com. And we really appreciate you liking and commenting. Take care.